Hello, and thank you for attending today's session. The core responsibility of the Residential Tenancies Authority is to administer the tenancy laws for Queensland and provide everybody involved in a tenancy information about tenancy laws. My name is Lynn Smith, and I'm the Senior Community Education Officer with the RTA. Today's session is about natural disasters and the storm season. So today's session, we are going to talk about the tenancy rules around natural disasters and non-liveability. So we have a special guest with us today from the State Emergency Service to talk to you about the SES, what it means to be prepared, offer you some tips on dealing with an emergency, and also information from the SES and how and when to contact them. And considering yesterday's storm in southeast Queensland or around Brisbane, I think this is a timely reminder that storm season is actually upon us. So our guest speaker today is the SES Acting Assistant Commissioner, Peter Jeffrey. So welcome, Peter.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Just before we do get started, if you'd like to just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, I've been with the State Emergency Service now for the last 4 years, and prior to that, my experience has been working in state and federal government, and I've got a military background. And by the way, I'm also a landlord, and so this topic is very interesting and personal to me.
Okay, great. So we are very lucky to have you here. It's like 34% of properties across Queensland are rented. So when a natural disaster hits, I think it's very important that landlords, agents, property managers and tenants know what to do and who to actually call. So questions for you, Peter, is if you can probably maybe give us an overview of what the SES does and maybe how many staff and volunteers you actually have.
Lynn, the State Emergency Service is a volunteer emergency service, and that's a point I'd like to make out. This is members of our communities giving back to their community. The functions of the SES cover storm damage, which is common for most people have seen the SES out there assisting with tarps or assisting in storm type environments. We also provide floodboat operations, which in those occasions where we have to deal with floods, we're out there assisting and supporting the rescues in those environments. Additionally, people will often see us involved in search in cooperation with the Queensland Police Service. And we also undertake some limited rescue in both road crash rescue and vertical rescue, or quite often that involves search and relocating people in some of the rural areas where they might get lost and need a little bit of the help of a rock face or two. We also work with other emergency services and organisations in a supporting function as well. So they're the broad functions that we do. That is provided by 98 staff who enable the some 6,000 active volunteers we have. We have another 1,000 volunteers who are in the probationary phase of becoming members of the SES, and we cover from Saibai to Stanthorpe. For those who don't know where Saibai is, that's our one of the northernmost islands in the Torres Strait chain. So we cover the whole state. We don't necessarily do that consistently. There is a number of our main base is where the population base is, so we are heavily skewed towards the coastal areas, but we do have groups across the entire state.
Great. Just with maybe for the last few disasters that we've actually had across Queensland, like the Brisbane storms last November and the cyclone in Rockhampton, do you have any stats in relation to those particular areas that have been affected recently?
In an average year, we will see the volunteers give in the order of 150,000 hours of operational support, and sitting behind that is 4 to 5 times that number of hours in training and preparation to undertake that task. If we have a look at the last year, on 27 November in Brisbane, there was the significant hailstorm that came through from Ipswich through to Brisbane. That created over 3,000 jobs that was responded to by not only the Brisbane SES, but by units from around the southeast part of the state, and even as far north as Rockhampton came to assist. When you go up a little bit further north to Rockhampton and Yeppoon and the tropical cyclone Marsha earlier this year, Marsha created a wake of destruction behind it, and we saw some 8,000 SES tasks that had to be responded to in that type of event.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Peter. So with natural disasters, we know that we have the storms, cyclones, bushfires, flood and earthquakes. So we have today in our session clients attending from all parts of Queensland, so including the rural and regional areas. So Peter, do you have any stats on how many cyclones we're going to be expecting this coming year?
At this stage of the year, the Bureau of Meteorology has given us some indicators, so it's not a hard prediction, but they've given us some indicators, and not surprisingly, we'll expect some 2 to 4 cyclones to cross in the north, and overall, though, the year will actually be more a hot dry than a hot wet. Notwithstanding that, we've seen that even just one cyclone can cause a significant amount of damage, and we need to be prepared and be ready for that.
Okay, I know we don't have a crystal ball to see how many storms we're going to be expecting, or is it the fact that the severity of the storms are expected to be worse?
We've certainly seen in the last few years that some of the storms that we're having are more intense and probably more frequent as well. And so, again, the art of prediction in meteorology, I'll leave to the Bureau of Meteorology to do that. But we need to be prepared for whatever level of storm.
Right. And I will ask, considering yesterday was a storm for most of those people around Brisbane, when does storm season start, or when is storm season?
As a broad approach, we would look at storm season being from October through to March. But as we've seen this year and in other years, the weather does not obey the calendar, and we need to be prepared for not only that period but also the shoulder periods as well.
Right. And I know that I have mentioned here earthquakes, but does Queensland actually get earthquakes?
Well, we had one in the southeast corner only a few months ago, and I think that was a surprise for a lot of people. It wasn't on a large or damaging scale, but it just shows the possibility that we still are exposed to earthquakes, but the likelihood and consequence is obviously lower than cyclone and storms.
Right. So I think one of the messages to take away is more the fact that always check the Weather Bureau's forecast in your actual area to make sure that you are prepared for what is actually coming up. So again, leading into storm season, one of today's key messages is to be prepared. Landlords, agents and tenants and their properties could be affected by severe weather. So Peter, what does it actually mean to be prepared?
Well, given my background with the Army, the basis of this is about planning. And one of the critical components to that is preparing your emergency plan. Now, the emergency plan, that should be a discussion of the whole family. My wife's a teacher, and we know that these severe storms that we encounter in different parts of the state cause concern for the young members of families. And so a discussion with the whole family so that people understand what it is to be prepared and what happens, what will the family do in the event of emergency is critical to the understanding. So having a plan is the first and one of the most critical components. In support of that emergency plan is having an emergency and evacuation kit. Part of your plan should identify what it is that's going to trigger your either staying in your house or moving. You don't want to be moving, evacuating from your home in the middle of a severe storm. So you have to make a decision. You have to think about how long it may take you to get to safety and have that factored in. And this is relevant to be it a storm or a bushfire type evacuation. You need to think through and make that decision in a timely way. Part of your emergency kit will include food, water, medicines, torch, battery, radio-operated battery, and there are now some sort of hand-wind radios that are available through various agencies. All of those things go to help building that emergency kit. And through the Get Ready website, there's a lot more detail on what's in that kit. So, have a plan and have an evacuation kit to back you up. Of course, the message we have about preparing your home is fundamental and is critical to the audience today. We talk about the gutters, and if the gutters there are full, then you actually have a risk in a wet environment of water coming inside. If they're dry, you have a fire risk. The other thing is to know where to get your information from. So tune into the warnings, tune into the radio, tune into, if you've still got power, tune into the Bureau of Meteorology. Some local governments provide additional warnings, so tune in there as well. So know where to go, know where to get the best and the most up-to-date information.
Great, thank you, Peter. So, and I guess too, for property managers and maybe even owners of businesses in today's session as well, is to probably make sure that you have like a business plan too for in case of a natural disaster.
Having a business continuity plan is essential, because if it's a significant disaster, it's really important for us to see local business in there start to function again, and we'll draw upon local business to help us to get that community back on its feet.
Right. So I think whether it's your own home or whether it's a rental property, it's important to get your property ready for storm season, and Peter has already mentioned about the cleaning of the gutters. So Peter, what are things that we should be looking at in getting our own homes, and also more importantly the rental properties, those properties ready for the storm?
So just assuming that most landlords would be doing regular maintenance on property and checking for any roof tile cracks, and as I've mentioned, clearing the gutters of leaf debris, trimming back those large branches, because that can cause damage to the home, or it can interrupt the house for power supply. Please make sure the tenants are aware of what they can do to secure any of the property in the outdoor area, and to protect the property in that regard. So I think it's very important to have that discussion about what can be done. With a landlord or tenant, check your home, particularly your contents insurance. Make sure it's current, know where to find the details in case of an emergency. And so in addition to knowing that it's current, also understand what is covered and what's not covered. And the last thing I would say is that in that regard is also make sure that it is in a waterproof bag, because if you need to make a claim and you have a soggy pile of pulp, that's a little bit hard to refer to.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but I think that's a good point, Peter. So what happens if you know that your property is flood prone? So whether I'm a landlord or a tenant, so if I know that my property could be affected, what should I be doing?
So in some cases we know there are areas that are affected by flash floods, and there are things that you can do in a long-term approach. You can actually have some engineering work done that gives you a bit of increased protection. You often see the use of sandbags, but just be aware that the number of sandbags you need to protect the property is more than one or two. You'll need to make several trips to a sandbag filling station, and it takes time to get those sandbags into the right position to actually protect your property from a flood.
Right. So I just want to touch on too in today's session on the tenancy rules as such. So this is when a natural disaster occurs, or when the property is deemed to be non-livable, and what does that mean? So we're going to also look at addressing rent reduction as an option. But before we do move on, I'd just like to quickly mention, as a reminder, Section 214 of our legislation. This actually talks about the urgent repairs, and it's always wise to have on your tenancy agreement contact details for like a nominated repairer, just in case there is an emergency, that the tenant will know who to contact. So this may be the landlord agent direct, or it could be tradespeople, but just keep in mind that emergencies don't always happen between 9 and 5, Monday to Friday. A lot of the times with emergencies, it will actually probably happen outside of hours. So Section 214 also states that flood damage, serious storm, fire or impact damage is also deemed to be an emergency repair. So for non-livability, this is where the property is deemed to be unsafe to live in for health and safety reasons. So it's very important to make sure that we understand those health and safety concerns for the person living in the property. And it may be that the property is only partly or wholly unlivable. So there's timeframes that's applying for ending a tenancy. You can end the tenancy by issuing a Form 12, which is the notice to leave, and the notice timeframe is that the tenancy ends on the same day the notice is given. The notice must be given within 1 month of the disaster. As I said, it may not happen straight away on the same day, but it may happen, within a matter of days. Just keep in mind too, if you are serving any notices by mail, the delivery time could be affected in your area by Australia Post. So if you are posting any notices, just need to keep that part in mind as well. You can also negotiate a mutually agreed date to terminate the tenancy. So it is a stressful time if a property is affected. So just keep in mind that you and the tenant may agree to mutually end the tenancy on a particular date. Anything that you do agree, please make sure that you do get that in writing. If you have issued a Form 12 notice to leave and the tenant has not left the property, your option is to apply to the tribunal, QCAT, and that would be an urgent application. So if we look at a rent reduction, so what happens if the property is still livable, but some of the areas have actually been damaged or not able to be used? The legislation outlines under Section 94 rent decreases, and it talks about if the premises are destroyed or made completely or partly unfit to live in, if a service or facility or goods are no longer available under the agreement, or the standard of the property has actually been decreased, you can look at doing a rent reduction. And again, this is probably something to consider, like what time frame, what type of property, what part of the area of the property has been damaged. So if we're looking at the garage might have been damaged because a tree fell on it, but the rest of the house is still livable. So it may be that there's a small reduction because you've actually lost that part of the property. So you need to consider the length of time that it would take to repair the property, whether it is a rent reduction or whether you're looking at offering the tenant a compensation amount, and negotiate and communicate with the tenant. As I said before, any agreements or any amendments to the agreements should be in writing, and everybody sign those agreements. So again, keep in mind the length of time, what has actually been damaged, and again, that communication is the key to resolving a lot of these issues, particularly, again, a sensitive time too. So with gutters and downpipes, and this is where we get a lot of questions about who is actually responsible. So with Section 185 of the legislation, the landlord is to maintain the premises fit for the tenant to live in and not in breach of any health and safety laws. Section 188 talks about the tenant's obligations. They have to keep the premises clean, having regard to the condition of the property at the start of the tenancy, and make sure that they return the property back in the same condition, less fair wear and tear. Unfortunately, our legislation does not specifically mention gutters and downpipes. So generally it's deemed, unless the tenant has done something to block the gutters, it's deemed that the landlord or the agent are responsible for the cleaning out of the gutters. So we know out there in the tenancy world, some tenants will clean gutters. We know some don't have the equipment to do it. From talking with agents and also talking to some of the trainers with the Real Estate Institute of Queensland, they have to look at maybe considering like any risks associated, so with the risks, the height, any potential injury. And I know that they see it as best practice that the lessor will actually have organised to get the gutters cleaned. And again, talking with some agents, they've also said that they do like an annual organising with the landlords, that it happens just prior to storm season, so that's great. Peter, I know you've been extremely busy, particularly in the past week, in getting the SES messages out there about storm season and being prepared. So can you sort of tell me, what does the actual SES do in getting themselves prepared? Because obviously it's the unknown, you don't know when a storm is going to come.
Throughout the year, so not just in storm season, throughout the year, the SES volunteers are coming together and they're working in their various depots and locations, and they're undertaking training to be prepared so that when the call comes, they can actually help the community that they're part of.
Great. So again, there's a website with a lot of information out there with the State Emergency Service. So with the tips on dealing with an emergency, and I know the first thing is obviously to stay calm, but you could be affected by a storm, a cyclone, a flood, or even bushfires out there. So what are your tips in dealing with the situation?
So in the first instance, people should look to be able to help themselves. There's things that can be done to mitigate the damage, and the volunteers are such that by the time they get to you, it may be some hours, particularly if it's a large-scale event. So there are certain things that that people should look to do to protect their goods inside. So sometimes it can be about putting a tarp inside the house over your goods and materials. And taking those sorts of steps while you wait for assistance from the volunteers.
Okay, and we've got here too, if it's a life-threatening emergency, that's not an SES situation, is it?
Absolutely. If it is life-threatening, ring 000. If it's life-threatening, 000 every time.
Okay, and they're listening for the updates. That's through the local, all radios do that, or is it just a specific radio?
Most radio stations will provide those updates, with regular weather reports, and around severe weather, they tend to intensify the number of those reports.
So again, if we just keep going, like the tips on dealing with emergencies. So before phoning the SES, your comment before was try to look at helping yourself. So what happens when I do phone the SES? What sort of information are you looking at to get from us?
So what we have is we've got three means of access. There's the traditional telephone call through 132500 that goes to a call centre. We also have an application that's available through both the Apple and Android, and we also have a website. And we've reduced the number of questions to try and simplify the information in. What will happen is when that task goes to an SES team, they will actually call you. So if there's one piece of information you've got to get absolutely correct, it's where you put that your phone number into the app, or give it to the operator, or into that website.
Okay, so this is all the details that you've just mentioned. So the emergency.qld.gov.au/SES, the SES Assistant Queensland app that's available, and as you said, be very specific and make sure your typing's good with no typos, and also to your phone number, the 132500 number.
Absolutely.
So communication is the key to resolving a lot of tenancy issues, so we try and encourage that. So where you can, try and resolve it, talk to each other, communicate with each other. If you cannot resolve the situation, you have access to the RTA's Dispute Resolution Service for assistance. So one of the questions we're quite often asked is, after a natural disaster, who's going to clean it up? The lessor is obviously responsible for the actual property, the house, and the tenant is responsible for their own contents. This is a situation where there should be probably some give and take and maybe some negotiation, because again, it is a stressful time for all people involved. You do have to consider the health and safety laws, and again, whether the property is still livable or partly livable. And when a natural disaster does strike, consider the access to the property. We know that in some areas the availability of tradespeople may be reduced just because of the nature of what's happened in that area. So it may take time to get repairs and get that cleanup happening. So the RTA's website has a lot of information and also some print-friendly fact sheets as well. And we also have a fact sheet that's available here on our front page of our website on natural disasters. So we would recommend going in and having a look at that, maybe printing it out, sending it out to your landlords and your tenants, making sure that they're aware and be prepared as well. And I know that, Peter, as I said, you've got a lot of information on your storm season, about storm season. Getting ready is the main message. So maybe you want to just let us know exactly what else other information that you have available.
So on those sites there are a lot of tips and hints and fact sheets, and so if you go to those websites you'll be able to get that information from those. And I'll just make a point about tradesmen, and that is that the SES, their assistance is only for temporary repairs, so you will need to get a tradesperson at some stage to come and do a permanent repair.
Right. So look, just before I do go on, so just with clients who may not speak English, do you have information available in other languages for if there's tenants out there that may not understand what the SES does and what to do to be prepared?
On the Get Ready site, there are fact sheets. The fact sheets that are there are available in 21 other languages. So the principal languages that are in use in Australia today, in addition to English, we have Chinese, we have Arabic, we have Japanese, 21 languages all up. But that information is available on the website as well.
Great. Well, just before, we do have questions coming through, so I am going to look at addressing those questions. So I want to just do a very big special thank you to you, Peter, for coming in to share with us today. I think it's extremely timely considering yesterday's event. And I know you've taken away, and hopefully our audience has taken away a few tips today, I know that I have, in making sure that we are storm ready, and also what to do in case of an emergency. Look, I think it's a great tool, maybe again, for property managers to download the fact sheets that you have available there, or maybe send a link out to their clients to share that information amongst the tenants as well. So I'm just going to sort of have a look at the questions that have come in. Some I think are more for me, Peter, and some are for yourself. One of the questions is it my responsibility to find a tenant a house if the property has been destroyed? The answer, obviously coming from a landlord property manager side of things, is no. At the end of the day, you know, obviously there's going to be some communication. You can maybe assist and everything like that, but there's nothing in our legislation that talks about that you must find a replacement property. One question for you, Peter. How do I become a volunteer?
There's information for that on our website, and throughout the state, in some areas we've got a lot of people wishing to volunteer, and so there's a bit of a waiting list in the southeast corner. But in the majority of the state, by contacting the local SES group and talking to them about the application process, they'll be able to help you through, and we would welcome you as a volunteer.
Great. So how long does it, this again for you, Peter, how long does it take for the SES to respond to an emergency once I phone?
It depends on a number of factors, but I guess the fundamental thing to realise here is that this is not a full-time service. This is a volunteer service, and what we've seen in some incidents is areas are restricted either by floodwater or restricted by traffic being caught in storms. And for our volunteers to get home and then get to the SES depot to coordinate, that takes time, and so it really is a difficult question to put a specific answer on. But I think if people just realise that it's about volunteers helping their community, we'll be there as soon as we can be.
Okay. Does the SES actually tarp up in storms, or is it more likely afterwards that they're tarping?
We've of course got to think about the safety of our own members, and depending on the conditions on the ground, we let our SES members make that determination as to the risk. We don't want our volunteers to become casualties and become part of the problem. They are going to be part of the response and part of the recovery. And so, you know, that decision is very much based on the risk assessment that's undertaken.
Okay. Another question coming in, probably more on my side, Peter, for tenancy laws, is can I enter without a Form 9? So the Form 9 is an entry notice. Section 192 of the legislation does set out the grounds. So I'm just going to read over my legislation, grounds of entry, and under items K and L of section 192, it does talk about that you can enter in an emergency, or if the lessor agent believes on reasonable grounds that the entry is necessary to protect the premises. So in those emergency situations, you may not be able to be issuing that Form 9 straight up, and you can actually still enter the property. So here's a good question, Peter. Who keeps the tarp, or where do you return the tarps?
Ideally, people return the tarps, but we are aware that some people have, because of time to get tradespersons to assist, they've held on to those tarps because they're necessary. Our preference is that the tarps are returned.
Right. And does the SCS clean up and remove leaf debris and tree debris in rental properties?
One of our focus is on the damage to livable areas. So if you take, for example, a tree was to fall on a garage, then that's not necessarily a livable area. So we'll be prioritising our work towards those areas that make the home or the property livable. We may help in those other situations, but it's about the priority, and particularly in large-scale events, we're going to help the most vulnerable in the first instance.
Right. But we've got got quite a few more questions coming in relation to the time frame for damages and repairs and boarding up windows. So if you have asked some more questions, what I might do is get back to you directly after the webinar. I'm conscious of the time that we have slightly gone over, Peter. So I will get back to those people who actually have asked those questions, and I will make contact with you. Again, the RTA's website has a lot of information. Please get that information and, again, share that with your clients, your landlord clients and tenants. It's been our pleasure to present today's webinar, and again, thank you very much for assisting us today, Peter, with your knowledge. It's been really great, and we will be running future webinars and seminars. The seminars across Queensland are continuing, the face-to-face ones for landlords and property managers, and next month we will be in Townsville. So again, thank you very much for your time, and our webinar will now end.
Thanks very much, Lynn.